Let's get back to the budget issue in West Virginia. Mike Hall is the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, joins us on MetroNews Talkline. Mike, good morning. How are you, sir?
I'm just fine.
Welcome
Thank
in.
you.
Do you want to, are you willing, as the chairman of the Budget Committee, and you've been poring over the budget and all related materials, are you willing to cut $390 to $609 million, which is the figure that Nick Casey gave us? Are you willing to cut that much from the budget?
Well, you framed that question in this interesting way about me, but I would just simply say that to start off, that just to actually have somebody sit down and say with authority, which, and I'll talk about why the governor should do this, and just actually identify those major cuts that they want to do and say this is what we'll have to do if we're going to do it is a good thing. I mean, last year I had a meeting with several members of some in the House and some in the Senate where I identified, I think, $358 million in cuts. And they were pretty draconian. I mean, they affected certain things, in my opinion. Others disagree. They say, no, we can absorb that. So, but at the end of the day, we as legislators came to I think, the pretty ubiquitous opinion. We all kind of agreed that it wasn't our role to cut that much out without the governor who administers these institutions and these agencies weighing in on it and saying this is the level that we can go to and we can manage the services of the state at that level.
All right, so I guess I'll rephrase that. So you think it's appropriate, you look forward to the governor saying this is what $400 to $600 million in cuts looks like?
Yes, because I didn't look forward to the governor handing a budget that spent that money and then said, now you need to find the revenue.
Okay. All right.
So that was the real challenge. And then just listen. I mean, I read the article that was written on your show, on West Virginia MetroNews about legislators and the budget. And I'm reading the comments and the public comments that I think that this process is necessary, that we finally get out into the public's discussion as well as in the legislative discussion exactly what it is that where you can go. And there are some legislators, I've talked to some even yesterday, who believe there's multi-million dollars of waste in government. So let's go there and dig into it and find out if higher ed can absorb $100 million cut. If you're going to cut.
Or
something. I'm not sure that's what it'll be.
Okay. If you're going to cut, Mike, the budget. If you're going to cut $400 to $600 million, no stone goes unturned. Higher ed would take a big cut. I'm going to guess, 5 to 10%. Public ed maybe would have to take a cut. You'd have to close colleges across the state. You'd have to lay off people. I mean, am I on the right track if you cut that much?
You're on the right track, and I would like to say something.
Sure.
I know it's a radio show, but just briefly, 67% of this budget is spent by statute already. So in order to cut like public ed that you mentioned, and you all have a nice chart on West Virginia Metro News that shows just, visually the general revenue obligations. Mm-hmm. And so you can just look at that, and I would tell anybody that's looking at that 67% of what you're looking at is already spent by statute. Public ed, what I'm saying there is public education's funding at $1.9 billion is driven by the law.
Right.
In order to cut that number, you have to propose a change in the school aid formula. That's true for several items inside the budget that you're looking at. When you're looking at health and human resources, that box that you've got on your website, a lot of that money is matched by the federal government and draws down another $3 billion outside the general revenue budget. The more you cut into that, the more you lose the other. So you have to go down through and decide, can you find $400 to $600 million in this list of things? And some things are probably not touchable. For example, I don't think military affairs and public safety is easy to touch. I mean, that's your prison system and the state police and those kinds of things.
Oh, I know. It gets dicey. Mike Hall is with us, the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. Let me go to the other side of this equation because I think that when you talk about cuts of that size, there are going to be a number of lawmakers and maybe the governor who say, you just can't do that. We're going to have to come up with more taxes. Now, let's talk about that side of it. If you go that route, The easiest one right off the top, there are two things. The consumer sales tax, each 1% increase in consumer sales tax brings in about another $180-190 million.
I think what would happen is, I think that the guys who do the revenue projections around we build a budget will give you that number, between 180 and 200 million.
Yeah. So there's that, which is real money. There's the elimination of the exemptions for the consumer sales tax, like media and lawyers and accountants and those kinds of things. There's real money there if you eliminated those exemptions, right? So those are a couple, if you wanted to do that, right?
Yeah, I think of course, I've expressed myself on this one. I think eliminating those exemptions doesn't come without some sort of effect on our economy in a negative manner. Mm-hmm. The business community would argue that, and there's reasons, and I've said this to my fellow legislators, that there's reasons why most of the states don't do that, because they studied it out and understand that though you're in theory collecting more revenue, because if you go out, and I've got the list in front of me, there's about 20 to 25 exemptions, that some of which are not easily noticed, but that's basically going to be a tax that finally makes it to the public, but it also, there are people that do these kinds of things that can just leave the state and do it somewhere else.
Yeah.
So those are not easy choices. I know that legislators talk about that, and this is my opinion, and people could argue back about it, but I say there's reasons why states don't do that, and we need to think very carefully before you go down that road. But on this list I'm looking at of exemptions, for example, if you're a nonprofit and you buy something, you have a tax number. You don't pay a sales tax. It's estimated that that's a $14 million cost to the state. Sales to educational institutions, the very same thing. Sales to counties and municipalities and government units pay no sales tax. You could eliminate those numbers, but then what happens? These are things that are on the list. Well, those are government agencies, so you're not really gaining much there. So
yeah, the government agencies, you just have a vicious circle. They're always talking about the exemption on the private sector. It's just another area that here. How are we going to do this? What's this going to look like? I mean, do you think that a week from okay, go ahead.
Here's what I'm hoping that. I think, and I've come over the years to believe that, for example, let's look back at the workers' compensation fix. There was a false start on that in 1995 and 6, and then when crisis finally hit during the Wise administration, a labor-oriented governor, the unthinkable to the labor movement was done, and workers' compensation was privatized. And they did it because it ripened. It became evident to the public mind that something had to be done. I believe that's where we're headed. That's why
so a crisis produces the kind of restructuring of government that you think.
But back during the Caperton years, the public kind of understood. They said, "We're not getting our PA bills saved. This blah blah blah." They did it, and there was a ripening to do what he did to fix the budget back then. Now, I'm not saying that's the route we're going, but I am saying that let's not just talk in the abstract about the problem. Let's look the problem in the face. And so if the governor presents a budget that cuts these things significantly and hands it to us, there'll be some legislators I'm reading that will immediately say, good, let's go with it. There'll be then there'll be constituency groups, and
sure,
there'll be a lot of.
It's going to be busy at the Capitol.
There'll be a lot of people coming in and saying why you should or shouldn't do this, and we won't be out floating around like we did last year for 3 months in the abstract, just looking at the rainy day fund.
Well, you also have, Mike. You will have, and I'm not going to pick on everybody. I'm not picking on anybody, but you'll have certain so-called budget hawks in the legislature who, when they look at what $500 to $600 million in cuts looks like, and they see, that school's in my district. That affects my constituents, and they're gonna recalibrate.
Yeah, let me give you an illustration of that if I've got a minute. Last year, the governor proposed a bill that affected the school aid formula. I believe was the increased enrollment line, and it was about $16 million. And I told this then Senate Education Chairman, because it was getting late in the session, I said, in that bill probably, that's money that the governor had already cut by executive order, but he needed legislation to do it going forward. So we brought it to the Finance Committee. And when you said it, they brought it to the Education Committee, which I was on. Well, the list of all the counties was there and how much money it cost all the counties, including mine and Mason and all of them, and it was in the thousands of dollars. I think Putnam was Putnam County people listen to this.
So I know what happened.
It was $600,000 to $700,000.
So I know what happened.
I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, all right, you could see right then and there when that list is passed out and legislators begin to look at how it affects them, that we couldn't get that out of that. We got it out of that committee without recommendation. Then it got politicized and in public coverage of it. And so finally I said, I don't think we're going anywhere with this. Let me say this. That little illustration of $16 million, take that to the 10th power as we come into this session when you sit there and see those lists. So, there's a side of me that says, absolutely, if there's waste there, getting rid of this, getting rid of that, and there are things that probably are going to go.
Well, here's the thing, though. Waste is a subjective, can be a subjective term, and this goes well beyond the vehicles or any of that kind of stuff. This is really operation of government.
Vehicles get brought up to me all the time, and
you can eliminate that. And you say, okay, that's part of it. You could say that's part of it, but you would need to do that about 50 times or 60 times.
Yes, you would. I think the vehicle purchase for the general revenue budget, I don't have the exact numbers, but the overall, all of government across all agencies, not including general revenue, is about $15 million a year.
Yeah. People say alcohol. People say alcohol. Well, we're not as big a drinkers as you might think. We smoke more than we drink. There's money there in tobacco, but you could double the tax on alcohol, which is kind of a complicated tax as I understand it, and then you'd lose business to surrounding states, and also you'd bring in about 10, 15 million.
Yeah, I tell you what, this ought to be a very interesting session.
Oh yeah,
there are going to be people obviously saying to the legislature, raise this tax or that tax, don't cut this, don't cut that. And basically the process I've looked at it, I've told my president, Mitch Carmichael, I said, look, I'm going to work through you. You're going to work with your members. And, as the caucus comes to an agreement on what to do, then, the Finance Committee will follow the lead of the overall caucus's views. And but I do believe that there'll be numbers of meetings and marches and everything going on.
Everybody's got to tighten their pants on this one because. All right, Senator Mike Hall, Chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. Mike will be talking to you. I appreciate you coming on today.
Right, thanks.
All right, take care. We'll be right back. Stay with us.